What if I told you that your deepest wounds are actually your greatest hidden treasures? Carl Jung discovered something revolutionary while working with men who had suffered profound trauma, something that completely changed how we understand masculine strength. He found that the men who became the most powerful leaders, the most authentic fathers, and the most magnetic partners weren't the ones who avoided pain. They were the ones who alchemized their wounds into wisdom. And by the end of this video, you will have the exact method Jung used to transform suffering into your greatest source of power. Carl Jung wasn't just another therapist, he was a pioneer who worked with some of the most broken men of his era. After World War I, he treated soldiers who came back shattered, carrying wounds that went far deeper than physical scars. What he discovered in his decades of research fundamentally changed psychology forever. Jung found that conventional therapy, which focused on healing wounds by making them disappear, was missing something crucial. The men who truly transformed weren't the ones who forgot their pain. They were the ones who learned to extract wisdom from it. He called this the wounded healer archetype. The understanding that our greatest wounds, when properly integrated, become our greatest gifts. Modern neuroscience now confirms Jung's insights. Studies show that men who process trauma through meaning-making rather than avoidance develop higher emotional intelligence, stronger leadership capabilities, and deeper capacity for authentic relationships. This isn't about dwelling in victimhood, it's about conscious alchemy. Jung proved that the difference between men who stay broken and men who become unbreakable isn't the absence of wounds, it's the wisdom to transform them. But here's what most men do instead. Picture this scenario that Jung witnessed countless times. You're successful by every external measure. Good career, respect from peers, maybe a family that looks perfect from the outside. But there's this quiet emptiness. This sense that you're performing strength instead of embodying it. You've mastered the art of the mask. When someone asks how you're doing, you default to fine or busy, never revealing the actual complexity of your inner world. You lead through authority rather than authenticity. You provide for your family, but struggle to connect with them emotionally. You're strong on the outside, but running on empty inside. Jung called this living from the persona, the character we perform to meet social expectations. But here's the trap. When we deny our wounds, they don't disappear. They go underground and start controlling us from the shadows. Let me show you how this plays out in 4 common patterns Jung identified. The armored executive. This is the man who built massive external success as armor against early feelings of inadequacy. Maybe he grew up poor, or his father never acknowledged his achievements, or he was bullied and decided to become invulnerable. He climbs the corporate ladder, accumulates wealth, gains status, but the original wound never heals. He's constantly proving himself, never feeling enough, driving himself and his team through perfectionism born from pain. His success is real, but it's built on a foundation of unprocessed hurt. The absent father. He swore he'd never be like his own distant, critical, or absent father. But because he never processed that original abandonment wound, he unconsciously recreates the pattern. He works obsessively, telling himself it's for the family, but really he's avoiding the intimacy that terrifies him. His children grow up feeling like they have a provider, not a father. The wound he tried to escape gets passed to the next generation. The controlling leader. This man experienced powerlessness early, maybe through abuse, chaos in his family, or some situation where he felt completely helpless. Now he needs to control everything and everyone around him. He micromanages, dominates conversations, and cannot delegate. His team respects his competence, but doesn't trust his character. His wound creates exactly the kind of toxic leadership that he probably suffered under himself. The eternal loner. He learned early that love equals pain, maybe through betrayal, loss, or simply growing up in an emotionally unavailable household. So he creates a life where he needs no one. He's successful, independent, self-sufficient, and deeply lonely. He attracts people with his strength, but repels them with his emotional unavailability. The wound that was supposed to protect him from pain ends up creating exactly the isolation he fears most. Do you recognize yourself in any of these patterns? Jung discovered that behind every destructive masculine behavior is an unprocessed wound trying to protect us from re-experiencing pain. But here's the paradox. The protection becomes the prison. This is where Jung's revolutionary insight comes in. He realized that our wounds aren't accidents to be overcome. They're assignments to be completed. Let me break down the 4 key concepts that will transform how you understand your pain. Jung discovered something that ancient wisdom traditions had known for millennia. The wound is where the light enters. He found that men who became truly powerful weren't those who avoided suffering. They were those who learned to use suffering as a portal to depth. Think about it this way. Your greatest wound carved out the deepest space in your soul. That space, once it's consciously filled with wisdom instead of unconsciously filled with pain, becomes your greatest capacity for strength, compassion, and authentic power. Jung worked with a soldier who lost his leg in battle and spent 2 years in bitter resentment. Through their work together, this man realized that his wound had taught him something invaluable about human fragility and resilience. He became a counselor for other amputees and later said that losing his leg was the most important thing that ever happened to him, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because it broke him open to a depth of compassion and purpose he never would have accessed otherwise. Here's where it gets deeper. Jung discovered that we don't just carry the pain of our wounds, we carry all the parts of ourselves that we rejected because of those wounds. He called this the shadow. If you were criticized as a child, you might have buried your natural expressiveness. If you were betrayed, you might have locked away your capacity for trust. If you experienced chaos, you might have suppressed your spontaneity. These aren't just memories. They're living parts of your personality that got exiled because they felt dangerous. But here's Jung's genius insight. Your shadow doesn't just contain your negative traits. It contains your repressed power, your buried creativity, your authentic wildness. Shadow work around wounds isn't just about healing trauma. It's about reclaiming the vital life force that got suppressed along with the pain. The man who was shamed for being too sensitive doesn't just need to heal the shame. He needs to reclaim his sensitivity as a superpower. The boy who was punished for being too aggressive doesn't just need to manage his anger. He needs to transform that fire into healthy boundaries and passionate purpose. This is Jung's most powerful discovery about masculine transformation. He found that the most effective healers, leaders, and mentors weren't those who had perfect lives. They were those who had consciously transformed their wounds into wisdom. The wounded healer is someone who has been broken by life and learned how to consciously reassemble themselves. They've walked through the valley of their own shadow and emerged with medicine for others walking the same path. Think about the leaders who have impacted you most deeply. I guarantee they weren't the ones who pretended to have it all figured out. They were the ones who could speak to your struggle because they'd been there themselves. They had credibility not because they were invulnerable, but because they were authentically powerful. Strength forged in the fire of genuine experience. Jung realized that this isn't just a nice idea. It's a fundamental law of psychological development. You cannot give what you haven't claimed. You cannot lead others through territories you haven't mapped yourself. Your wound becomes your medicine, but only after you've done the conscious work to extract the wisdom from the pain. Here's Jung's most sophisticated concept, and it's crucial for understanding how transformation actually works. The transcendent function is your psyche's ability to hold opposites in creative tension until a new level of consciousness emerges. Most men try to resolve the tension of their wounds by choosing one side. Either they become hard and invulnerable, or they become soft and overly sensitive. Either they suppress all emotion, or they're overwhelmed by it. Either they trust no one, or they trust everyone. But Jung discovered that real power comes from learning to hold both sides simultaneously, being strong and sensitive, independent and connected, confident and humble. The transcendent function allows you to access whatever response is most authentic and effective in each moment, rather than defaulting to rigid patterns born from old wounds. This is what it means to be a truly integrated man. You're not trying to eliminate your wounds or pretend they don't exist. You're using the tension between your pain and your power to create something new, a version of yourself that's both more vulnerable and more strong than you could ever be from either extreme alone. Now let me give you Jung's practical method for transforming your wounds into wisdom. I call it the WISDOM process, and it's based directly on the techniques Jung used with his patients. This isn't theory. This is the actual roadmap. The first step is the hardest for most men. Actually feeling the wound instead of immediately trying to fix, escape, or rationalize it. Jung discovered that most of our psychological problems come from our resistance to our pain, not the pain itself. Here's how you do it. Set aside 20 minutes when you won't be interrupted. Sit quietly and bring to mind your deepest wound, the experience that shaped how you see yourself, relationships, or the world. Don't analyze it yet, just witness it. Feel where it lives in your body. Notice what emotions arise. Observe the stories your mind tells about it. The key is to be present with the wound without immediately jumping into problem-solving mode. Most men have never actually felt their pain fully because they learned early that feelings were dangerous or weak. Jung called this active suffering, consciously choosing to be present with difficulty instead of unconsciously being controlled by it. When you can witness your wound without fleeing, you reclaim power over it. The second step is accepting the wound as part of your story without judgment. This doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you stop wasting energy on resistance and channel that energy into transformation instead. Jung worked with a man whose father was an alcoholic. For decades, this man carried rage about his ruined childhood. Jung helped him see that his wound had also given him extraordinary empathy, self-reliance, and ability to detect when someone was being inauthentic. The wound wasn't just damage, it was also development. Ask yourself, what qualities did this wound force me to develop? What would I never have learned without this experience? How has this pain given me access to understanding others couldn't have? You're not grateful for the wound itself, but you're claiming the gifts that emerged from your response to it. Jung believed that our wounds aren't random. They're part of a larger pattern in our life that's trying to teach us something essential about our authentic nature and purpose. Look at your major wounds and ask, what's the common thread? What lesson keeps showing up in different forms? What part of myself have I been rejecting because of these experiences? Maybe all your wounds relate to feeling unseen by your father, in relationships, at work. The pattern might be teaching you about your deep need for authentic recognition and your calling to truly see others. Maybe your wounds all involve betrayal, and the pattern is teaching you about discernment and the importance of building relationships slowly and consciously. Jung found that when men could see the pattern, they stopped feeling like victims of random suffering and started understanding themselves as protagonists in a meaningful story of development. This is one of Jung's most powerful techniques, treating your wound as if it were a wise teacher rather than just pain to be eliminated. Jung called this active imagination, consciously engaging with the unconscious parts of your psyche. Find a quiet space and imagine sitting across from your wound as if it were a person. Ask it questions. What are you trying to teach me? What do you need me to understand? How can I honor the lesson without continuing to suffer? Jung discovered that our wounds often carry the seeds of our greatest gifts. The man wounded by an absent father might carry within that wound a calling to be an extraordinary father himself. The man betrayed in business might carry the wound that teaches him to build companies based on genuine trust and integrity. Listen to what your wound wants to express. Often, it's not asking you to stay hurt. It's asking you to claim the power and wisdom that emerge from your response to the pain. Now you take everything you've learned and organize it into conscious principles that guide your life going forward. Jung emphasized that insights without integration are just interesting ideas. They don't create transformation. Write down the specific wisdom your wound has taught you. What do you now know about life, relationships, leadership, or yourself that you wouldn't know without this experience? How do these insights inform the way you make decisions, treat others, or show up in the world? Turn your wound into your teaching. The executive who learned about authentic power versus positional power. The father who learned how to be present because he knew the cost of absence. The leader who learned how to create safety because he understood what it felt like to be in danger. Your wound becomes your area of expertise, not just intellectual knowledge, but lived wisdom that has credibility because it was earned through experience. The final step is where your wound becomes your medicine for the world. Jung discovered that the healing process isn't complete until you find ways to serve others through the wisdom you've gained. This doesn't mean you have to become a therapist or coach. It means you look for opportunities to use your hard-earned wisdom to help other men navigate similar challenges. Maybe you mentor younger guys at work who remind you of yourself. Maybe you have different conversations with your sons about emotions and vulnerability. Maybe you lead your team differently because you understand what it feels like to work for someone who leads from wounds instead of wisdom. Jung believed that this is how masculine wisdom gets passed down, not through theories or platitudes, but through men who have walked through fire and learned how to transform their pain into service for others. When you can help another man avoid your mistakes or transform his own wounds more quickly because of your experience, your suffering becomes meaningful. It stops being just something that happened to you and becomes something that happened for others through you. Here's what I want you to understand. You are not your wounds, but you're also not who you would be without them. Your wounds have carved out spaces in your soul that, when filled with conscious wisdom instead of unconscious pain, become your greatest capacities for strength, depth, and authentic power. Imagine leading from this place. Imagine showing up in your relationships not as someone trying to avoid being hurt again, but as someone who has learned how to transform pain into power. Imagine raising sons who understand that vulnerability and strength aren't opposites. They're dance partners. Imagine building a career or business that's guided by the deep wisdom you've extracted from your most difficult experiences. This is what Jung called individuation. Becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. It's not about perfection. It's about integration. It's not about eliminating your wounds. It's about alchemizing them into medicine. Here's your assignment for this week. Choose one significant wound from your life, not necessarily the biggest or most traumatic, but one that still has emotional charge when you think about it. Take it through the first 3 steps of the WISDOM process. Witness it fully without trying to fix it. Integrate it without judgment by acknowledging what qualities it forced you to develop. Seek the pattern by asking what larger lesson this wound is part of in your life. Don't rush this. Jung emphasized that transformation happens in spiral rather than linear time. You might need to return to these steps multiple times as you discover deeper layers of meaning and integration. I want you to share your insights in the comments, not the details of your trauma, but the wisdom you're beginning to extract from it. What pattern are you starting to see? What qualities did your wound force you to develop? How might this pain become medicine for other men walking a similar path? I'll show you exactly how to access the raw power that society taught you to suppress, how to transform your anger into healthy boundaries, your selfishness into authentic self-care, and your aggression into passionate purpose. This is advanced masculine psychology, the kind that creates authentic power rather than toxic dominance. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this journey requires commitment, community, and the courage to face what most men spend their lives avoiding. Remember, your wounds aren't evidence of your weakness. They're proof of your strength. You survived, you're here, and now you have the tools to transform your pain into power, your wounds into wisdom, and your suffering into service. The world needs conscious men who have done this work. Your family needs it. Your community needs it. And somewhere out there, there's a man walking through the same dark valley you've already navigated, who needs the wisdom you've earned the right to share. Don't let your pain be wasted. Transform it into medicine. Become the wounded healer Jung knew you could be.